Every summer, my dad and I would disappear into the mountains, a ritual he'd honored since his own boyhood. At 16, I had finally grown into it, trading childish impatience for a genuine appreciation of the quiet and the climb. Our trip last year began, as they always did, with a hopeful search online for a new, untried spot. We found one, a small, unassuming blip on a topographic map, described in a sparse forum post as an easy, uncrowded trail to a secluded pine grove. There were no pictures, but the promise of solitude was enough. We set out on a Friday morning, parking our truck on a gravel turnout that barely qualified as a shoulder. The air was cool and sweet, with the smell of damp earth and fir. For the first quarter mile, the path held its promise, a soft bed of needles winding through majestic trees. Then the trail began to change. Easy became a steep, grueling incline, littered with loose shale. Uncrowded revealed itself as neglected, the path often vanishing entirely beneath thickets of thorny brush and sucking shoe-swallowing mud. We were committed, though, and after a brutal 2-hour slog, we arrived at our destination. The secluded pine grove was just that, a grove of pines. There was no clearing, no fire ring, no evidence that anyone had ever camped there. It was no different from the woods we had just fought through. A cramped, dim plot of land where the trees seemed to press in a little closer. A faint sense of disappointment hung in the air, but we shrugged it off and began the familiar ritual of setting up camp. The nylon rustle of the tent, the metallic ping of the poles snapping together. These sounds were a comfort. As the sun began its descent, painting the high canopy in strokes of orange and purple, we ventured a short way from camp to gather dry kindling. We were laughing about something, my dad's voice a familiar steady rumble in the growing quiet, when the sound cut through the forest. It was a scream, a man's voice, raw and shredded, erupting from the distance with a violence that shocked the air itself. It wasn't a call for help. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a noise that spoke of being torn apart. The sound hit me in the chest, a cold fist of dread. The forest, which had been humming with the evening chorus of insects, fell utterly silent. My dad and I froze, our eyes locked. 30 seconds of breathless silence passed. Then it came again, closer this time. The same harrowing yell, filled with a pain so intense it felt like a physical presence in the clearing. I looked at my dad. His face was pale, all the easy confidence gone, replaced by a deep, conflicted worry. He was a man who helped people. Leaving someone in distress was anathema to his very being. But he was also a father, and his first duty was to me. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and deathly serious. "Do not leave this fire. If anyone comes into this camp that isn't me, you run. You run and you don't look back, understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I watched him grab his heavy flashlight and a knife from his pack before plunging into the darkening woods, following the terrible sound. I stood alone by the crackling fire, the circle of light feeling impossibly small and fragile. 10 minutes ticked by. 20. The sun was completely gone now, and a deep, velvety blackness settled between the trees. The screams had stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. A listening, waiting silence that pressed in on my eardrums. Where was he? Had he found the man? Were they both hurt? The anxiety became unbearable. I took a few steps away from the fire, then a few more. peering into the murk toward where he'd vanished. That's when I heard it. Not a scream, but footsteps. Steady, crunching footsteps, walking with a deliberate pace directly toward me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the frantic run of my dad returning. This was a calm, measured approach. I stood paralyzed, staring into the black, waiting for the owner of those steps to emerge. A profound, eerie feeling of wrongness washed over me. Just as I was certain a shape would form from the shadows, my dad's voice, sharp with panic, sliced through the air from my left. "Go! Now! Back to camp!" He burst into the clearing not from the direction of the footsteps, but from the side, his face a ghastly mask of pure terror. He didn't stop. He sprinted to our tents, yanked his backpack, and started shoving items into it with frantic energy. "Dad, what did you see? Who was it? No time. We have to go. Now." The look on his face stifled any further argument. It was a look of such profound horror that it erased every other question. We left everything, the tents, our sleeping bags, the cooking gear, and ran. We ran until our lungs burned, then fast walked, constantly looking over our shoulders, until we stumbled, gasping, onto the road where our truck waited. The drive home was shrouded in a heavy silence. When I finally found the courage to ask, he just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't ever talk about it." And he never has. His face still goes ashen if the trip is mentioned. All I'm left with is the memory of those two sets of sounds. The agonized screams that came from the front, and the calm, deliberate footsteps that came from behind, and the chilling certainty that whatever was making them was not the same thing. College brought new friends and new traditions. With finals over, my friends Ryan and Jamie decided a camping trip was the perfect way to blow off steam. Jamie, an Eagle Scout, was our seasoned guide. Ryan and I were city mice, utterly reliant on his expertise. Jamie promised us a great spot, a huge open field, right on the edge of a rushing river, a couple of miles into a state forest. When we arrived, it was perfect. The field was vast and clear, bordered by the river on one side and a dense wall of trees on the other. We had the whole place to ourselves. We set our 3 tents up in a loose triangle right in the middle, a declaration of our dominion over the space. As the afternoon wore on and a few beers were cracked by the fire, I happened to glance toward the distant tree line. "Hey, are those hunters?" I asked, pointing. 3 figures dressed in muted, dirt-colored greens and browns stood motionless just inside the shadow of the forest. They had large packs and a rugged, utilitarian look. Jamie squinted. "No," he said, his tone shifting from relaxed to concerned. "No hunting allowed in this preserve, not even in season." "That's weird," Ryan laughed it off. "Probably just some hardcore hikers." "Relax, man." Jamie didn't relax. He watched them until they eventually melted back into the woods. Hours later, full of burgers and tired from the hike, we called it a night. The profound darkness of the countryside and the unfamiliar sounds of nature made sleep elusive for me. I was lying on my back, staring at the nylon ceiling of my tent when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the clumsy, shuffling steps of one of my friends going to take a leak. These were measured, purposeful steps. One set, then another, and another. A slow, single-file line of people was walking past our campsite. My blood went cold. Why no lights? Why walk in a perfect line, in the dead of night, through the middle of an open field? They had to have seen our tents. They were walking right past them. I held my breath, listening as the footsteps reached their closest point, maybe 10 feet from my head, and then began to fade. The moment they were a sufficient distance away, I slowly, silently unzipped my tent. As I did, I heard the identical sound from Ryan's tent. Our heads popped out at the same time, our eyes wide with identical alarm in the faint starlight. We didn't speak. We just pointed toward the retreating figures, now just darker shades of black against the night. We scrambled over to Jamie's tent and woke him. As we whispered the story, his face drained of color. "That's not right," he murmured. "That's not right at all." The decision was unanimous and immediate. We were leaving. We moved quickly, packing with frantic, hushed urgency. I was stuffing my sleeping bag into its sack when Jamie's hand clamped onto my arm. His grip vise-like. "Don't move," he breathed, his voice trembling. We followed his gaze back to the tree line. The group had stopped. 5, maybe 6 figures were standing in a row at the edge of the forest, facing us. They were perfectly still. They were watching us back. They had been waiting. The feeling was indescribable. It wasn't curiosity. It was a silent, patient observation that felt predatory. Our pretense of quiet urgency vanished. We abandoned any attempt at order, shoved the rest of our gear into our packs, and ran. We didn't turn our headlamps on until we were a half-mile down the trail, fleeing not from what they had done, but from what they hadn't done. They never called out, never approached. They just watched. And we knew, with absolute certainty, that our paths crossing was no accident. I'm a solo camper by nature. I don't seek adventure or challenge. I seek quiet. My sanctuary was a small lake, a mere 30-minute walk from a parking area. The campsite was right on the water, a peaceful slice of solitude I considered my own. Until the day he was there. I arrived in the late afternoon to find a beat-up sedan already parked. A knot of annoyance tightened in my stomach. As I rounded the final bend and the lake came into view, I saw his tent. It was an old olive drab thing, set up closer to the water than I would have liked. And there he was, a man in his 40s, with unkempt hair, wearing grubby swimming trunks and a stained white t-shirt. He was pacing the shoreline in slow, deliberate circles, not swimming, not fishing, just pacing. I gave him a wide berth, setting up my newer, brighter tent a good 100 yards away. As I busied myself with the familiar task, gathering large stones to build a fire ring, the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. I straightened up and looked toward the lake. He had stopped pacing. He was standing perfectly still, his entire body facing me. He was too far away to see his eyes, but his posture was one of intense, unwavering focus. I felt a chill. This wasn't a friendly glance between campers. It was a fixed, unnerving stare. I raised a hand in a hesitant, awkward wave, a social cue meant to break the tension. He didn't wave back. He simply turned his back on me and resumed his pacing, as if I had suddenly ceased to exist. The dismissal was somehow creepier than the stare. I tried to shake it off, setting up my camp chair by the water to read. But my focus was shot. Every few minutes, my eyes would dart up, checking on him. He continued his lonely patrol. Finally, after about 20 minutes, he turned and walked away from the lake, disappearing into the thick woods behind his tent. I breathed a sigh of relief. As the sun began to set, I lit my fire and sat down, enjoying the crackle of the flames and the dance of the light. It was then, as I gazed absently into the forest, that I saw him again. A flash of white, deep back in the trees, far behind his own campsite. I squinted. It was him. He was standing motionless beside a thick pine tree, half hidden in the shadows, facing me. He had been standing there, watching me, for who knows how long. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I deliberately moved my chair so the fire was between us, putting him directly in my line of sight. A standoff. For 40 minutes, he didn't move a muscle. He just stood there, a silent, statuesque sentinel in the growing dark. As full night fell, the firelight created a small sphere of vision around me. But beyond it was an impenetrable wall of blackness. I could no longer see him, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that he could still see me. The fire illuminated me perfectly. The thought of packing up and hiking out in the dark with him somewhere out there in the void was more terrifying than staying. So I stayed. I sat awake all night, feeding the fire, jumping at every snap of a twig. My imagination ran wild, transforming every shadow into his approaching form. The moment the first hint of gray light touched the sky, I moved. I didn't break down my tent neatly. I didn't douse the fire properly. I yanked the stakes from the ground, stuffed the whole tangled mess into my pack, and I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't see him. His tent was still there, a silent testament to his presence. I often wonder what he wanted. But most of all, I'm certain that if I had let my guard down, if I had gone to sleep, I would have found out.